So this video will cover the heart structure and cardiac output section of the cardiovascular disease and cardiovascular system section of the Unit 2, the higher. So I'm going to cover the heart structure, which will mainly be a review of the National 5 course, and then a little bit of higher content will cover the valves. And then the second part of this will cover cardiac output. So if you're looking for the conducting system stuff, we'll be doing that in the next video, but you really should be watching this first so you understand the structure of the heart first. Okay, so in terms of the diagram of the heart, it can look very different from this, but the same rough structure applies to all diagrams. And the first thing you should do with any diagram of the heart is label which side is which. So on the heart, you're looking at which side it would be on you. So if you hold the paper onto yourself, then this side would be on the right hand side of your body, which is therefore the right hand side of your heart. So right side is deoxygenated blood. And then this over here is the left side, which is oxygenated. Now this diagram shows the heart as well. Looks slightly different. I'm going to do the same thing, right on this side, left on this side. So you need to have a label of the chambers first. So this one here would be on the right hand side, and therefore would be the right atrium. Now in this diagram this will be the same. Okay, so just shorten it to RA for right atrium. This on the left hand side is the left atrium. The bottom chambers are ventricles, so this would be your right ventricle. And this on the bottom side, on the left, would be the left ventricle. Now for this you've got to think about the blood flow and where it's coming from so that you can label all the blood vessels. So for the right hand side, because it's deoxygenated, I'll just do it in blue. Now this blood here is coming in to the right atrium. Okay, so that blood here will be coming from the body because it's used up all the oxygen. So the main vein that brings blood back from the body would be the vena cava. Now this one will be coming from the body and this one will be coming from the head, so it's still a vena cava because it's feeding into the right atrium. That blood would then flow into the right atrium from these blood vessels, be pushed through this valve, which we'll cover later. The right ventricle would squeeze and push blood up and out through another valve and out into these blood vessels here. Now this blood is deoxygenated, it basically needs to go and collect oxygen. So it will do that by going to the lungs, and we refer to the lungs as pulmonary. And this one, because it's leaving the heart, is an artery because blood is travelling away from the heart. Okay, the blood returns from the lungs on the left hand side and these two blood vessels here, and it is oxygenated now because it's been to the lungs and picked up. So lungs, so pulmonary, and then vein because it drains back to the heart. That blood comes in from both those blood vessels into the left atrium, is pushed through that valve there, and then squeezed up and out through this blood vessel called the aorta, which is the main artery leaving your heart, big one that supplies your body. And before I forget, I'll do the same on this side for the chambers. So this is the right atrium, therefore this will be the right ventricle. This is the left atrium. This is the left ventricle. Now sometimes in an exam they might show you a slightly different looking diagram than this one, obviously. So if they showed you blood vessels coming in the way, that'd be your vena cava coming into your right atrium, just like over here. The one coming into the left atrium would be your pulmonary vein, and then the one that's coming out of the right ventricle would be the pulmonary artery. And the one coming out of the left ventricle would be the aorta. So they can show you it in quite a few different ways. Now, all of this so far is National 5 level knowledge. The main part that would actually be covered in the higher is this structure that would be the centre of the heart, right down the middle. This is the central wall of the heart, and that's important for later when we talk about the cardiac conducting system. Now you have two different valves. I'm going to highlight them in two different colours. The valves prevent backflow of blood just like they would do in veins, but specifically from certain chambers to others. So this valve here and this valve here are between atria and ventricles. So this valve here and this valve here are what's known as the atrioventricular valves, because they're between an atria and a ventricle. Okay, they're sometimes shortened to AV valves, and you can absolutely use that as an answer in an exam. So just to kind of highlight this and make it a bit clearer, because it probably won't show up very well in the video. These ones here between the atria and the ventricles, they're the AV valves. Now if you look at the way the blood is flowing normally, but it's going from the left and right atrium down into the left and right ventricles. So these prevent backflow of blood from going from each of the ventricles back up into the atria. Now the other two, which are these ones here, these are found in the arteries that leave the heart, in the pulmonary artery and the aorta. And they prevent blood from flowing back down from the aorta into the left ventricle and from the pulmonary artery into the left ventricle. And these ones are called semilunar valves. Okay, sometimes shortened to SL valves. Now in a diagram, again, they could show you in this, but often, well, particularly for this diagram, it would really only be the AV valves to be able to show. Now in terms of the structure of the heart and the internal part of it, that's it done. But you would be asked for the exterior to be able to label a part of it. So this is the exterior of the heart on the outside, so it's not sectioned off to show the chambers. It's basically just a front view to show these blood vessels. Now these blood vessels are called the coronary arteries. And again, this is a National 5 point that we're still needing to remember. Okay, so these supply the heart itself with blood, and particularly oxygenated blood. Now the reason you need to still know these from National 5 is because we're going to talk about it in terms of heart attacks. So if there's a blockage in one of these coronary arteries, it will lead to a heart attack, which we'll learn more about in the cardiovascular disease section. Okay, so in terms of the structure of the heart, that's it done. And what we're going to do is move on and do cardiac output now. So cardiac output is one of the calculations that you'll need to be able to, carry out calculations, about cardiac output. So there's an equation that you'll need to know, and you need to be able to manipulate this equation and use it. So a bit like chemistry. So this CO stands for cardiac output. It is measured in milliliters per minute, or normally, more specifically, liters per minute, and that'll be really important. Right, and cardiac output is the volume of blood which is pumped out the heart, or pumped through the ventricles. So pumped out of each ventricle. And specifically it's per minute. Okay, now heart rate, we should know is measured in BPM, which is beats per minute. And the heart rate is very simply just the number of beats per minute. Okay, so stroke volume you've not heard of yet. Stroke volume is measured in mils per beat. And that is the volume of blood which is pumped out of the heart in each beat. Okay, so to calculate the cardiac output, what you'll need to do is multiply the heart rate and the stroke volume together, and that'll find you your answer. Now, if you're a chemist, you'll have recognised, or will recognise one of these wee triangles. So what this is showing you is that you can manipulate that equation. So you would do cardiac output, HR and SV. What that means is the ones sitting next to each other, you would multiply them to get the top. Or for example, if you were looking for heart rate, you would divide cardiac output by stroke volume. Or if you're looking for stroke volume, you would divide cardiac output by heart rate. Okay, so that might not work for you, and that's okay. It's just if you're familiar with those kind of things from chemistry or even from maths, then that might make a bit more sense. So I'm going to give you an example, a couple of example calculations, and particularly how to manipulate this equation as well. So the one I've got here is looking for cardiac output. And then what you'll have to use is the heart rate and the stroke volume. So your heart rate I'm going to give as an example would be 70 beats per minute. And the stroke volume I'm going to give you as an example is 85. Now that is mils per beat. And then what we're going to do is multiply those together, and that'll give you an answer of 5950 mils per minute, because cardiac output unit is mils per minute first of all. Now what you want to do is convert it into litres. So what you would do with that is divide this by 1,000, and that would give you 5.95 litres per minute. And that would be your CO, your cardiac output, in litres per minute. So be wary when it comes to these calculations, they'll ask you for a specific unit and you need to use that specific unit. Okay, this example here is stroke volume. So it's looking for stroke volume, and then it would need to give you the cardiac output and the heart rate. So in this example, I'm going to give you a cardiac output, which is 8.55 litres per minute. And then the heart rate is going to be 90. Now for this, stroke volume is measured in mils, but this we've given it in litres. So what you need to do first of all is times this by 1,000 to give you it in mils. So that will give you 8,550, and that's in mils per minute. Okay, and then you would divide that by your 90 that we had for heart rate. And then the answer it will give you then would be 95. And then because it's stroke volume that we're looking to find out, stroke volume's unit is mils per beat. Now if they were asking you to do these kind of calculations as an extended kind of question, then they would have to give you all the units. Typically they're not going to do that. Normally they would give you it in a multiple choice, but you would be expected to manipulate them just the same. The last one is for you trying to figure out heart rate from cardiac output and stroke volume. So if I give you an example then of cardiac output being 5.36, but that's in litres per minute, and a stroke volume of 80. You still need to convert this into mils so that you can then do the rest of the equation. So you would times this by 1,000 again, and that gives you 5,360 mils per minute, which you would then divide by your stroke volume, which is 80. Now once you do that calculation, it gives you then 67. And because it's heart rate, it would be 67 beats per minute. Okay, so for later on when we do the ECG calculations, this will maybe link into that. So you will need to know how to do a cardiac output to then be able to use the ECG. I'm going to stop here and then move on and do the cardiac conducting system. So make sure that you understand the structure of the heart to be able to know what the next one actually will make sense and know how that works.